The door opened, and Seoul's most dangerous man forgot how to breathe. Kong Minj had orchestrated this evening like every other operation. Precise, calculated, designed to produce exactly the outcome he desired. The private dining room at Hanwoo Mayanga occupied the 47th floor of a building he partially owned, its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a city that pulsed with 10 million lives, none of which mattered to him at this particular moment, because Amara Okafor had just walked through the door, and she was not the woman he had invited. The restaurant fell into that particular Korean silence, the kind that communicated more than words ever could. Conversations didn't simply pause, they evaporated. The Somalia's hand froze mid-pour. Park Jun-ho, Minj's most trusted advisor, sat down his whiskey glass with a soft click that seemed to echo. Minj's associates had been laughing moments ago. They had been anticipating the spectacle he'd promised, the awkward secretary stumbling into this world of tailored suits and billion-won deals, clutching her worn leather bag, pushing up those thick framed glasses, probably wearing something she'd purchased at a Myeongdong department store 5 years ago. Instead, she stood in the doorway, like she had been born there. The dress was midnight blue, not black, which would have been safe, predictable. Midnight blue, the color of Seoul sky just before the city lights consumed the stars. It draped across her shoulders with architectural precision, the fabric catching light in ways that suggested Korean craftsmanship. But the gold threading at her wrists, the subtle geometric patterns climbing toward her elbows, those were unmistakably African Yoruba. Perhaps the kind of detail only someone who understood both worlds could execute. Her hair was different. The tight, practical bun she always wore at the office had been replaced by an elegant updo that exposed the graceful line of her neck. Small gold earrings, simple, expensive, deliberate, caught the candlelight. But it wasn't the dress. It wasn't the hair. It was the way she looked at him. Minjae had spent 37 years perfecting the art of reading people. He could detect a lie in the space between a man's heartbeats. He could sense betrayal before the betrayer had consciously chosen to betray. He had built an empire on his ability to understand what people wanted, what they feared, what they would sacrifice. Amara Okafor looked at him like she already knew every secret he had ever kept. His fingers tightened around the crystal whiskey glass in his hand. The pressure was slight, controlled, invisible to anyone who wasn't watching closely, but Park Jun-ho was watching closely. Minjae could feel his advisor's attention shift, could feel the question forming in the silence between them. She walked toward their table, not rushed, not nervous. Each step measured, unhurried, as though she had calculated exactly how long this moment should last. The soft click of her heels against the marble floor created a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with Minj's pulse. Or perhaps his pulse had begun synchronizing with her. He did not stand. The other men at the table scrambled to their feet. Cho Sun-hun nearly knocked over his wine glass, and Director Kim's chair scraped against the floor with an undignified screech. But Kong Minj remained seated, because standing would have meant acknowledging that something had changed. Standing would have meant admitting that the woman approaching him was not the same woman who had spent 18 months organizing his schedule, fetching his documents, and fading so completely into the background of his life that he sometimes forgot she was in the room. Mr. Kong, her voice was different too. The same careful Korean pronunciation. The same slight musical quality she couldn't quite eliminate. But tonight, there was something underneath it, confidence perhaps, or amusement, as though she found something about this situation genuinely entertaining. Miss Okafor. He kept his voice neutral, controlled. You found the restaurant. Your directions were very clear. She took her seat without waiting for anyone to pull out her chair. The movement was fluid, natural, as though she dined in places like this regularly. Perhaps she did. Perhaps there was an entire life she had been living outside the glass walls of his office building. A life he had never bothered to investigate. The thought irritated him. Across the table, Cho Sun-hun, a man who had made his fortune in construction and his reputation in cruelty, stared at Amara with an expression Min-jae recognized. It was the same expression men wore when they saw something valuable they intended to acquire. Min-jae Sun-hun's voice carried that particular blend of familiarity and difference that wealthy associates used when addressing someone more powerful than themselves. You didn't tell us your secretary was so refined. The word landed precisely where Sun-hun had aimed it. Refined. Not beautiful, which would have been too direct. Not elegant, which would have implied admiration. Refined suggested surprise. Suggested that whatever Amara was presenting tonight was a departure from her natural state. It was an insult dressed in silk. Amara smiled. Min-jae watched her smile, and something in his chest tightened. It wasn't the polite professional expression she offered during board meetings. This smile had edges. Mr. Cho. She turned her attention to Sun-hun with a warmth that didn't reach her eyes. I've heard so much about your construction projects, the Gongnom development specifically. Fascinating work building luxury apartments over a site with such complicated history. The silence that followed was absolute. Sun-hun's face went carefully blank. Director Kim suddenly found his wine glass very interesting. Park Jun-ho made a sound that might have been a cough, but was almost certainly suppressed laughter. Min-jae understood what had just happened. The Gongnam development sat on land that had been contested for years. Contested because the previous owners had refused to sell, had been pressured, had eventually disappeared. Officially, they had immigrated. Unofficially, everyone in this room knew better. How did Amara Okafor, his quiet, bookish, utterly unremarkable secretary, know anything about the Gongnom development? More importantly, why was she choosing this moment to reveal that she knew? Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. What do you think Min-jae will discover about his secretary by the end of tonight? Drop your predictions in the comments below. I promise you, whatever you're thinking, you're probably wrong. The Somalia materialized beside Amara with the wine list, and Min-jae used the moment to study her more carefully. 18 months. She had worked for him for 18 months. In that time, she had never once been late, never made an error in his schedule, never questioned his decisions, never offered opinions beyond, "Yes, Mr. Kong." And, of course, Mr. Kong, and I'll arrange that immediately, Mr. Kong. She had been invisible. He had wanted her to be invisible when he'd hired her. When his HR director had presented a stack of candidates, and he'd glanced through them with the interest he might give a wine list, he had chosen Amara specifically because she seemed like someone who would never distract him. The thick glasses, the practical clothes, the way she kept her eyes lowered, her voice soft, her presence small. Now those same eyes were scanning the wine list with obvious expertise, and her voice was warm as she discussed tannin levels with the sommelier in Korean, so fluent that Director Kim's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "The 2018 Chateau Margaux," she said finally, "if the gentlemen have no objections." No one objected. No one could think of anything to say. Min-jae lifted his whiskey glass and took a slow sip, using the gesture to buy time. His mind was running calculations it had never needed to run before. How had he missed this? How had this woman existed in his orbit for 18 months without him seeing her? What else had he failed to see? Miss Okafor. He set the glass down. I don't believe I've seen that dress before. It was a ridiculous thing to say. Of course, he hadn't seen the dress before. He had never paid attention to what she wore. He had never paid attention to anything about her, except whether his schedule was correct and his coffee was hot. But she smiled again, that sharp, knowing smile, and said, "You've never invited me to dinner before, Mr. Kong." There it was, the acknowledgement of what this evening actually was. He had invited her as a joke. She knew he had invited her as a joke, and she had walked into this room, dressed like a woman, who understood exactly what game was being played, and had decided to change the rules. Rain began to tap against the windows, soft at first, then building into the kind of steady Korean autumn rain that could last for hours. The city lights below blurred and shifted through the water on the glass, transforming Seoul into an impressionist painting. "Tell me," Sun Hun said, recovering his composure with the ease of a man who had survived far worse social mishaps. "Where does a secretary learn so much about real estate development?" Amara accepted the wine the sommelier poured, held it to the light, swirled it with practiced ease. "My father was a businessman, Mr. Cho. In Legagos, he taught me that the most valuable information is often the information people assume you don't have. Lagos." Minjae filed the detail away. He knew she was Nigerian. Her employment file listed her birthplace as Abuja, but she rarely spoke about her background. In 18 months, he had learned exactly 3 personal facts about her. She drank tea when stressed. She arrived early to everything. And she sent money home to someone whose name she never mentioned. Now he was learning more in 5 minutes than he had in a year and a half. It bothered him. It bothered him that she had secrets. It bothered him that she had chosen to reveal them here tonight in front of these men. It bothered him that the joke he had carefully planned, watching his awkward secretary stumble through an evening with Seoul's elite, had transformed into something he didn't understand. "Your father." Director Kim spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the carefully neutral tone of a man who had survived in Minja's world by never committing to any position. "Is he still in Legagos?" Something flickered across Amara's face. It was brief, so brief that Minj almost missed it. A shadow, a tension in the muscles around her eyes, a tightening of her fingers around the wineglass stem. "My father passed away," she said several years ago. "My condolences." Kim's response was automatic, meaningless. "Thank you." Amama's response was equally automatic, equally meaningless. But Minj had seen that shadow, and he filed it away with everything else he was learning. Her father was dead. She still sent money to Nigeria. She knew things about Seoul's underground economy that a simple secretary shouldn't know. She had spent 18 months pretending to be invisible. Why? The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of Korean banchon, alongside what Minjae recognized as African-inspired preparations. Jollof rice reimagined as tiny pearls. Suya spices dusted over paper-thin slices of beef. The chef had clearly received specific instructions. Amara's instructions. "You arranged the menu." Minjae said, "It wasn't a question. You invited me to dinner, Mr. Kong. I assumed that meant you wanted to know something about where I come from." The audacity of it struck him like a physical blow. Elmozga says she had contacted the restaurant. She had coordinated with the chef. She had transformed his joke into her introduction. Park Jun-ho was definitely laughing now, though he disguised it as a coughing fit. Fascinating, Sung-hun murmured. his earlier hostility fading into something more dangerous interest. He was leaning forward slightly, his attention fixed on Amara with an intensity that Minj recognized. A woman of many talents. Amara met his gaze. A woman who pays attention, Mr. Cho. Nothing more. Under the table, Minj's hand curled into a fist. The tattoo on his wrist, a traditional Korean dragon, its scales rendered in precise black ink, seemed to pulse against his skin. He forced himself to relax his fingers, forced himself to maintain the composure that had earned him his reputation. The Silent King did not react. The Silent King observed. The Silent King waited until he understood exactly what he was dealing with before making any move. But watching Sunung-hun lean toward his secretary, watching that predatory interest sharpen in the construction magnate's eyes, Minj found himself struggling to maintain his silence. She's mine. The thought emerged without permission, unexpected and unwelcome. He crushed it immediately. Amara Okafor was his employee. She was useful. She was apparently far more capable than he had realized. But she was not his, in any sense, beyond the professional. So why did his jaw tighten when Sung-hun reached across the table to refill her wine glass? Why did his eyes track every movement of the older man's hands? Why did something dark and possessive uncurl in his chest when Amara laughed at a joke Sung-hun made? A genuine laugh, warm and unexpected, that Minj had never heard before. The rain intensified. Seoul's lights flickered through the water, streaming down the windows. The restaurant hummed with soft conversation from other tables, other dinners, other lives that had nothing to do with the strange tension building at Minj's private table. You speak Korean very well, Director Kim observed, apparently deciding that linguistics were a safer topic than dead fathers and shady real estate deals. Where did you study? My mother was Korean. Was past tense again? Ah. Kim nodded, as though this explained everything. That must have made the transition to Seoul easier. In some ways, Amara's voice gone careful, measured. In others, it made things more complicated. Min-jae watched her face as she spoke. She was controlling her expression, the way he controlled his deliberately, consciously, choosing exactly what to reveal and what to conceal. It was a skill he recognized because he had spent decades perfecting it. Where had she learned it? Complicated how? Sun-hun pressed, his interest now openly fixed on her. Amara sat down her wine glass. When you belong to two worlds, Mr. Cho, you often find that neither world is entirely certain you belong to them. You're too Korean for Nigeria, too Nigerian for Korea, too foreign to ever be fully trusted. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I imagine some of the gentlemen at this table understand that feeling. It was a masterful deflection. By including them in the observation, she had shifted the focus away from herself, while simultaneously suggesting that everyone at this table was in some way an outsider. The construction magnate with his rural origins, the corporate director with his new money, the right-hand man with his reformed gang connections, and Min-jae himself, whose legitimate business empire was built on foundations that polite society preferred not to examine. She was playing them. He was absolutely certain of it now. Everything about this evening, the dress, the confidence, the carefully revealed pieces of personal history was calculated. She had walked into this room with a plan, and he had no idea what that plan was. The realization should have angered him. It should have triggered the cold, decisive response that had built his empire and destroyed his enemies. Someone in his orbit was hiding something. And in his world, hidden things were always dangerous. But instead of anger, Min-jae felt something else. Fascination. He leaned back in his chair, letting his shoulders relax into a posture of casual interest that had fooled hundreds of business rivals. Miss Okafor, you mentioned your father taught you about information. What else did he teach you? Their eyes met across the table. For a moment, just a moment, her careful composure flickered. He saw something real underneath it. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. As though she had just realized that his question was more dangerous than it appeared. He taught me, she said slowly, that powerful men often make the mistake of believing that the people around them have nothing valuable to offer. They look for threats among their rivals, while ignoring the secretaries, the drivers, the cleaning staff who move through their world unseen. She paused. He taught me that invisibility can be a weapon. The table had gone silent again. Park Junho was no longer laughing. A weapon? Min-jae repeated. Interesting choice of words. Is it? Amara picked up her chopsticks, selected a piece of beef with precise movements. I thought it was simply the truth. Something was happening. Something MJ couldn't quite name. The conversation had shifted, had moved beneath the surface into waters he didn't entirely control. He was used to controlling every room he entered. He was used to knowing more than everyone else, understanding more, anticipating more. Right now, he understood nothing, and she was looking at him with those dark eyes that should have been familiar after 18 months, eyes that were suddenly those of a complete stranger. And he had the distinct impression that she understood everything, Mr. Kong Park Jinhos. Voice cut through the tension, deliberately casual. The Bususan shipment. We should discuss the timeline. It was a rescue, a chance to redirect the conversation toward business, toward territory. Min-jae understood. He should take it. He should spend the rest of this dinner discussing logistics and percentages and the 100 other details that kept his empire running. Instead, he kept his eyes on Amara. The Bususan shipment can wait. Junho's eyebrows lifted slightly, the only sign of surprise he would allow himself. In all their years together, Minj had never postponed business for anything. Certainly not for a conversation with his secretary. Tell me more, Minj said, about these weapons invisible people carry. The dinner lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of careful conversation, of probing questions and deflected answers, of the strange dance that happens when two people with secrets try to understand what the other knows without revealing what they themselves are hiding. Sun-hun eventually lost interest, his attention drifting to his phone as some business crisis demanded his attention. Director Kim excused himself early, citing an early meeting that may or may not have existed. Park Junho remained, watching everything with the sharp attention of a man who had survived too many power shifts to ever fully relax. By the time the dessert course arrived, a delicate fusion of Korean paping su and Nigerian chin-chin that must have required weeks of planning, only 3 of them remained at the table. Miss Okafor Minj sat down his coffee cup, a precise movement that signaled the end of the social portion of the evening. I believe I owe you an apology. She looked at him. In the candlelight, her skin seemed to glow with warmth, that particular deep brown that always made him think of earth after rain, of ancient wood, of things that lasted. She had removed her jacket at some point, and the gold threading on her sleeves caught the light with every small movement. An apology, Mr. Kong. This dinner? He met her eyes directly. I arranged it because I wanted to see how you would perform in an unfamiliar environment. I expected, he paused, searching for words that wouldn't make him sound like a complete bastard. I expected to learn your limitations. And instead, I learned that I have been significantly underestimating my own secretary for over a year. He allowed a small smile, the first genuine expression he had shown all evening, which is embarrassing for someone who prides himself on accurate assessments. Amara sat down her own coffee. Her expression was unreadable, but something had shifted in her posture. A slight relaxation of tension. The barest suggestion that his admission had surprised her. "Wanted to embarrass me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, you expected me to confirm whatever assumptions you had made about the quiet Nigerian woman who organizes your calendar." "Yes." And now Minjae considered the question. In the windows behind her, Seoul pulsed with light and shadow, with rain still streaking across the glass. The city he controlled, the empire he had built, the world he understood. And this woman sitting across from him, who had suddenly become the most complicated thing in it. "Now," he said slowly, "I find myself wondering what other assumptions I need to reconsider." She smiled. Not the sharp smile from earlier, but something softer, more genuine, more dangerous. "Perhaps you should start by asking me directly, Mr. Kong, instead of arranging elaborate tests. Would you answer honestly?" "That depends." She stood, her movements fluid and certain, on whether you're prepared to hear things that might change how you see your own empire. The words landed with precision. Minjae felt them like a physical impact, a challenge wrapped in silk, an invitation that was also a warning. Park Junho shifted in his seat. "Minjae, Junho." Minjae didn't look away from Amara. "Arrange a car for Miss Okafor." "I came in my own vehicle, Mr. Kong." She gathered her jacket, her small purse, movement that were unhurried, controlled. "But thank you for the dinner. It was educational." Educational. He let the word hang in the air. "Yes, it was." She turned to leave, and something in Minjae's chest tightened. The evening couldn't end like this. Too many questions remained unanswered. Too many secrets still hidden in the spaces between her words. "Miss Okafor." She paused at the door, turned. The candlelight caught the gold in her earrings, the subtle patterns in her dress. She looked like a woman from another world. Not the awkward secretary who had spent 18 months fetching his coffee, but someone powerful and mysterious and infinitely complex. "Tomorrow," he said. "My office." 9. Yes. We have a 9:32 meeting with the Osaka investors. 9:00. Before the meeting, she studied him for a long moment. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows. Seoul breathed and pulsed beneath them. Somewhere in the restaurant, a glass clinked against a table. Someone laughed at a joke Minjae couldn't hear. "Of course, Mr. Kong," she said finally. "Whatever you require." She walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Minjae sat in the silence she had left behind, his coffee growing cold, his mind running calculations it had never needed to run. Park Junho was watching him with an expression that might have been concern, or might have been amusement. "That, Junho said quietly, was not how you expected this evening to go." "No." Minj picked up his whiskey glass, found it empty, set it down again. "It was not. She knows things about Sun Hun's construction project. Probably about other things as well." "Yes, makes her dangerous." "I'm aware." Jinho leaned forward, his voice dropping to the register he used when discussions became serious. "Minjae, I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you outmaneuver the Japanese cartels, survive the Hong Kong transition, build something that even the old families respect. In all that time, I've never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at her tonight. Minj's jaw tightened. The tattoo on his wrist seemed to pulse again. The dragon that had been his father's and his grandfather's before that. The mark of a family that had survived by controlling their emotions. Absolutely. I looked at her like someone who had made an error in judgment. He said nothing more. He looked at her like a man who had just realized the ground beneath his feet wasn't as solid as he believed. The words hung in the air. Outside, the rain continued. Seoul continued. The world continued to turn exactly as it had before Amara Okafor walked into that restaurant. But something had changed. Something in the way Min-jae understood his own world had shifted, and he wasn't sure it would ever shift back. She reached her car before allowing herself to shake. The parking garage beneath the restaurant was cold. The fluorescent lights harsh after the restaurant's elegant warmth. Amara sat in the driver's seat of her modest Hyundai, the same practical vehicle she had driven for 3 years, and watched her hands tremble against the steering wheel. She had done it. 18 months of careful preparation. 18 months of being invisible, of letting Kong Minj and his associates see exactly what they expected to see. 18 months of watching, listening, learning the rhythms of an empire that had destroyed her family. And tonight she had announced herself. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number she knew by heart, but had never saved. "Did he see you?" She typed back. "He saw me." And she considered the question. In her mind, she replayed the evening, Minj's controlled expression when she entered, the way his fingers had tightened on his glass, the strange intensity in his eyes when he asked about invisible weapons. He had invited her tonight, expecting a joke. She had arrived prepared for war, but somewhere between the first course and the last, something had shifted. The way he looked at her, the way he apologized, the way he had asked genuinely, without the condescension she expected to understand what assumptions he needed to reconsider. Kong Minj was supposed to be her enemy. He was supposed to be the cold, calculating monster who had ordered the operations that destroyed her father's business, that had pushed her family to ruin, that had driven her father to an early grave. But enemies didn't look at you the way he had looked at her tonight. Enemies didn't apologize. And the message prompted again. She stared at her phone at the question, waiting for an answer. "He saw me." She typed again, but I'm not sure what he understood. "Don't lose focus. Remember why you're there." She remembered. How could she forget her father's face in the months before he died, gaunt and haunted, destroyed by the business losses that had come from nowhere? Her mother's tears, the old photograph she still carried, her parents on their wedding day, her Nigerian father and Korean mother smiling as though the future held nothing but happiness. She was here for revenge. She had spent 3 years planning this, learning Korean perfectly, building the resume that would get her hired at Kong Industries, becoming the invisible secretary who heard everything while being noticed by no one. She had collected information carefully, pieced together the truth of what Minj's organization had done to her father's Legos trading company. And now she was inside. Now the man who had destroyed her family was looking at her with something that might have been fascination. The phone buzzed again. "Amara, don't forget." She turned off the phone without responding. In the parking garage's harsh light, she studied her reflection in the rearview mirror. The elegant woman from the dinner still looked back at her. The woman she had decided to become when she walked through that restaurant door. The woman her father had always believed she could be. Invisible can be a weapon, she had told Min-jae. but so could being seen. The question was whether she could control which weapon she wielded. 3 floors above, Kong Minj stood at his office window and watched her car pull out of the garage. The rain had stopped. Seoul stretched below him, glittering and endless, filled with 10 million lives he had spent 37 years learning to control. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. The sharp suit, the controlled expression, the dragon tattoo barely visible at his wrist. The Silent King, the name had been given to him by rivals who had learned too late that his quietest moments were his most dangerous. He had built everything on that silence, on the ability to watch without revealing, to plan without announcing, to move without warning. But tonight, watching Amara Okafor's tail lights disappear into Seoul's rain streets, the silence felt different. It felt like the moment before a storm. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The secretary. She's not who she claims to be. He stared at the words for a long moment. Explain? He typed back. The response came 30 seconds later. Her real name is Amara Okafor, but her father was Emmanuel Okafor, Lego's trading corporation. You ordered his destruction 7 years ago. She's here for revenge. The phone nearly slipped from Minj's fingers. He gripped it tighter, staring at the message, his mind suddenly recalculating everything from the past 18 months. Every cup of coffee she'd brought him, every document she'd filed, every schedule she'd organized with perfect precision. She'd been in his office for 18 months. She had access to his calendar, his meetings, his private files, and she wanted revenge for something he had never ordered. Minjae closed his eyes. 7 years ago, Lego's trading corp had been destroyed, but not on his command. He knew exactly who had given that order, exactly whose ambition had extended into African markets without authorization. His younger brother? The same brother who had been killed 6 years ago in what appeared to be a car accident. The same brother whose death Minjae had never fully investigated because some questions were too dangerous to answer. Who sent this? He typed. The response was immediate. Someone who doesn't want to see her get hurt. The information was clear. Someone else knew about Amara's plan. Someone else had been watching. And now they were warning him, or perhaps warning her through him. He looked out at the city again. Somewhere in those rains streets, his secretary was driving home to whatever life she lived outside his awareness, planning whatever revenge she had spent 18 months preparing. She thought he had destroyed her father. She was wrong. But the truth was far more complicated than she understood. And the person responsible was already dead, murdered perhaps by the same forces that were now sending Minjae anonymous messages about his secretary's true identity. His finger hovered over the phone. He could have her arrested. He could have her deported. He could make her disappear so completely that no one would ever know she had existed. Instead, he typed, I want to meet. The response took 3 minutes. Tomorrow, the warehouse on Inch on Do 7. Midnight. He read the message. Read it again. Someone was playing a game far more complex than Amara's simple revenge plot. Someone knew things about his brother's death, about the Legos operation, about connections Minjae had spent years pretending didn't exist, and that someone wanted to meet. He should send Junho. He should send security, backup, an entire team of the men who had helped him build his empire. Walking into an unknown meeting alone was exactly the kind of mistake that got powerful men killed. But the message had mentioned Amara, someone who doesn't want to see her get hurt. Whoever was sending these messages was protecting her, which meant they knew her, which meant she had allies. Min-jae didn't know about support systems he hadn't anticipated. His secretary, his invisible, underestimated, impossibly transformed secretary, was at the center of something far larger than revenge. And Min-jae realized, with a cold clarity that should have disturbed him more than it did, that he didn't want to see her get hurt either. The dragon on his wrist seemed to burn as he typed his final message. "I'll be there." Amara had just finished removing her earrings when the knock came. Her apartment was small but comfortable, a modest place in Hungai that she had chosen specifically because it was unremarkable. 2 rooms, basic furniture, nothing that suggested she was anything other than the ordinary secretary she pretended to be. The knock came again. Harder this time. She checked her phone. No calls, no messages. The security camera she had installed, one of several precautions that had nothing to do with her ordinary secretary persona, showed a figure in the hallway, female, well-dressed, standing with the particular stillness of someone who was used to waiting. Mara hesitated. Then she opened the door. The woman on the other side was perhaps 40, elegant in a way that spoke of old Korean money. Her clothes were tasteful and expensive. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes were the coldest thing Sam Amara had ever seen. Miss Okafor, the woman's Korean, was perfect, aristocratic. "I'm sorry for the late hour, but I believe we need to have a conversation. Who are you?" The woman smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "My name is Kong Sanhee. I'm MJ's mother, and I know exactly what you're planning to do to my son. Who is this mysterious woman who just appeared at Amara's door? What does Minja's mother know about the plot against her son? And what will happen when the truth about Amara's father finally comes to light? Drop your theories in the comments. I promise you won't be able to guess what happens next." Amara did not step back. It was instinct. The same instinct that had kept her alive through years of careful planning, years of being underestimated, years of surviving in a world that had taken everything from her. You never showed weakness, especially not to predators, and Kong Suni was definitely a predator. "May I come in?" The older woman's voice was silk over steel. "I prefer not to have conversations of this nature in hallways. I'm not sure we have anything to discuss, Mrs. Kong." "We have everything to discuss, Miss Okafor." Sunhee's eyes swept over Amara's apartment, taking in the modest furniture, the practical layout, the single photograph on the bookshelf that Amara should have hidden, but never could bring herself to discard. "You've been in my son's office for 18 months. You've collected information, built relationships, positioned self carefully. You've done everything except the one thing you actually came to do." The accuracy of the assessment struck Amara like ice water. "How do you know?" "Please." Sunhee stepped past her into the apartment, moving with the casual authority of a woman who had spent decades occupying spaces that didn't belong to her. "Did you think you were the only one watching? The only one with secrets and plans and quiet revenge?" She settled onto Amara's small sofa as though it were a throne. "Sit down, child. We have a great deal to discuss, and very little time to discuss it." Against every survival instinct screaming at her to run, Amara sat. The rain had started again. Soul's lights filtered through her window, casting strange shadows across Sononi's face. In this light, Amara could see the resemblance to Minj. The same sharp cheekbones, the same controlled expressions, the same sense that every movement was calculated. "You think my son destroyed your father's company?" It wasn't a question. "You think he gave the order that bankrupted Legos Trading Corp, that drove Emmanuel Okafor to an early grave? You spent years building this belief, turning it into a weapon. Amara's hands curled into fists. I have proof. You have the proof someone wanted you to find, son. He cut her off with quiet precision. Documents that trace the orders to Kong Industries. Financial records that show the money moving through accounts my son controlled. Everything neat, everything traceable, everything pointing to the heir of Seoul's most powerful underworld family. Are you saying it's fake? I'm saying the truth is more complicated than revenge usually allows for. Sun-hee's eyes held something Amara couldn't quite identify. Min-jae didn't order the destruction of your father's company. His brother did. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. His brother is dead. Yes. Sun-hee's voice carried no emotion. He died 6 years ago. A car accident. Officially. Unofficially. She paused. Unofficially. Min-jae has spent 6 years wondering whether that accident was actually an accident. Rain drummed against the windows. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. The ordinary sounds of ordinary lives continuing, while Amara's world rearranged itself around her. Why are you telling me this? Because you're not the only one who wants the truth. Son-hye leaned forward, her eyes suddenly intense. My younger son, Junio, was ambitious, reckless. He made decisions that Minj never authorized. Extended the family's reach into markets we had deliberately avoided. Africa, Southeast Asia, places where the rules were different. And Min-jae didn't know. Min-jae was in Tokyo when the Lagos operation happened. A business trip that lasted 6 weeks, conveniently long enough for Junio to act without oversight. Sun-hee's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. By the time Min-jae returned, your father's company was already destroyed. Junio claimed it was a necessary expansion. Min-jae was displeased. Displeased. Such a cold word for what must have been a catastrophic family confrontation. And a year later, Junio died. Yes. Are you saying Min-jae killed his own brother? The silence that followed was absolute. Sunny rose from the sofa, moving toward the window. Seoul spread beneath them, glittering and endless, full of secrets that would never see daylight. I'm saying that Junio made enemies. Many enemies. And the list of people who might have wanted him dead is very, very long. She turned to face Amara. But there's something else you should know. Something that changes everything. What? Junio didn't act alone. He had help. Someone inside our organization who saw an opportunity to expand into African markets. Who provided the intelligence? Who helped plan the operation that destroyed your father? Sun-hye's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That person is still alive, still in our organization, and they've been watching you since the day you applied for the secretary position. The implications washed over Amara like cold water. She hadn't been as invisible as she believed. Someone had known from the very beginning. Who? I don't know yet. Sun-hee's admission seemed to cost her something. But I intend to find out, which is why I'm here tonight. Miss Okafor, I'm offering you a choice. What kind of choice? You can continue your revenge. Try to destroy Min-jae for something he didn't do. Waste your talents on the wrong target, while the person actually responsible laughs at both of you. Son, he stepped closer, her presence suddenly overwhelming despite her elegant frame. Or you can help me find the truth. Help me discover who really ordered your father's destruction. Help me understand why my younger son had to die. It was Amara realized a masterful manipulation. Sun-hee wasn't asking her to abandon her quest for justice. She was redirecting it, channeling Amara's rage toward a target that served the older woman's purposes. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Not completely. Trust is earned, not given. Son, he moved toward the door. But consider this. I could have simply had you removed, arrested, deported. Instead, I'm standing in your apartment at midnight, offering you the chance to actually accomplish what you came here to do. She paused at the door. Tomorrow evening, the Kong family estate in Pyeongching-dong. 8. Zawuro. Minj will be there, and so will most of the people who might have helped Juno with his African operations. Her eyes met Mars. Watch them. Watch how they react to you, and then tell me which one is hiding the most. And if I refuse, Sunny's smile was thin and cold. Then I'll have no reason to keep protecting you, and neither will my son. She walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar behind her. Amara sat in the silence, her mind racing through everything she had just learned. Min-jae didn't order the attack. His brother did. And someone else, someone still alive, still watching, had helped. 6 years of planning, 18 months of preparation, all built on an assumption that was fundamentally wrong, but not entirely wrong. Someone in Kong had destroyed her father. That truth remained, even if the face attached to it had changed. She walked to her bookshelf, picked up the photograph she should have hidden. Her parents on their wedding day. Her father, tall and proud in his traditional Nigerian attire. Her mother, delicate and elegant in her Korean hanbok. 2 worlds coming together. 2 worlds that had eventually torn each other apart. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I blamed the wrong person." But as she set the photograph down, she realized something else. Sun-hee had said Min-jae would be at the family estate tomorrow. Sun-hee had suggested that Amara watch how people reacted to her, which meant the transformation wasn't over, which meant tomorrow night she would have to walk into Kong Minj's family home, into the center of the world that had destroyed her own, and pretend to be someone she wasn't again. But this time, she wouldn't be invisible. This time, she was the weapon. Min-jae reached the Inchan warehouse at 11:45. The dock was quiet at this hour, the massive shipping containers casting long shadows in the industrial lighting. His car sat at the far end of the lot, its engine still warm. He had come alone against every rule he had ever established for situations like this. But this situation wasn't like anything he had ever experienced. He walked through the warehouse entrance, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Shipping crates towered on either side, labels in half a dozen languages marking their contents. The smell of salt and machinery hung in the air. A figure waited at the center of the warehouse floor. Mr. Kong. The voice was male, Korean, familiar. "Thank you for coming." Min-jae stopped 10 FT away, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. And then recognition struck him like a physical blow. Director Yun Park Sun Min Kong Industries' chief financial officer stepped out of the shadows. He was 53, grey at the temples, dressed in the same conservative suits he had worn to every board meeting for the past decade. He had been Minja's father's financial advisor. He had helped structure the family's transition from old money to legitimate business. He was supposed to be completely trustworthy. "I apologize for the mystery." Yun's voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had spent decades hiding things. "But what I have to tell you couldn't be shared through normal channels. You know about Amara Okafor?" "I know everything about Amara Okafor." Yun pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I've known since she applied for the secretary position 3 years ago. I've known since before she stepped foot in your office." "Explain." Yun handed him the envelope. Inside were photographs. Old photographs faded with time. Minjo recognized the settings immediately. Lagos, Nigeria. His brother standing beside a man in traditional African business attire, Emmanuel Okafor. Junio didn't plan the Lagos operation alone. Yun said he had help, financial backing intelligence on the local markets. A pause. He had me. The warehouse fell silent. Minje stared at the photographs, his brother's face, Emmanuel Okapor's face, and in the background of one image, barely visible, Park Sun-min, 15 years younger, shaking hands with someone off camera. You helped destroy her father. I helped your brother expand into markets your father had forbidden. African trade routes, shipping channels that bypassed official oversight. Yun's voice carried no guilt, no shame. It was incredibly profitable. And yes, Emmanuel Okapor's company was in the way. So we removed it. Why are you telling me this now? Because your brother is dead, and the person who killed him is still alive. Yun's eyes met Minje's directly. And because that person is getting ready to make their move against you. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop. Junior's death wasn't an accident. No, it was arranged by someone who wanted to stop the African expansion. Someone who saw it as a threat. Yun stepped closer. I've spent 6 years trying to identify them. I thought if I kept my head down, kept quiet, they would leave me alone. But then Amara Okafor arrived. She's here for revenge. She's here because someone wanted her here. Someone has been feeding her information, pointing her toward your family, setting her up as a weapon. Yun's voice dropped. The same someone who killed your brother. Minje's mind ran through possibilities with machine-like precision. Someone powerful enough to arrange Junio's death. Someone connected enough to know about Amara Okapor's background. Someone patient enough to wait 6 years before making another move. Who? I have theories. Yun glanced around the warehouse as though checking for listeners. But no proof. Not yet. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm telling you this. You want protection. I want to survive. There was raw honesty in Yun's voice. Whoever killed Junio has been watching me, following me. I think though I'm close to identifying them. And I think they're planning to silence me before I can. So, you're using me? I'm giving you the truth, Mr. Kong. Something I should have done 6 years ago. I reached into his jacket again, pulled out a flash drive. Everything is on here. Financial records, communications. The trail that proves Junio didn't act alone. The trail that might lead to whoever wanted him dead. Minje took the drive, and Amara Okafor. Yin's expression shifted. Something almost like guilt flickering across his features. She's innocent as anyone who spent their life seeking revenge for something that was done to them. She doesn't understand the full picture. She thinks your family destroyed her father. She doesn't know about the person who used that destruction as cover for something larger. There are people who want to tear apart everything you've built, and who used that destruction as cover for something larger. There are people who want to tear apart everything you've built. People who see Kong Industries as an obstacle, who see your influence and soul as a threat to their own ambitions. Yin's voice was urgent now. Amara Okafor was supposed to be their weapon. A sympathetic victim, a righteous avenger, someone whose attack on you would seem justified to anyone investigating afterward. The full scope of it settled over Minje like a weight. She had been manipulated from the beginning. The documents she had found, the trail that led to him, the job opportunity that had placed her in his office. None of it was coincidence. Someone had set her up as a weapon pointed at his heart. And she didn't even know. The family estate tomorrow? Minjae said slowly. My mother is hosting a gathering. Yes. You nodded. The perfect opportunity to watch, to identify. Whoever is behind this will be there. They'll be watching her. Watching you. Waiting to see if their plan is working. And you? I'll be there too. Yun's smile was thin, tired, playing my part, pretending I don't know anything about what's really happening. He turned toward the warehouse door. Be careful, Mr. Kong. You're not the only one who's been underestimating Amara Okafor, and you're not the only one who's been watching her. He walked into the darkness and disappeared. Minjae stood alone in the empty warehouse, the flash drive heavy in his hand. Amara Okafor believed she was hunting him. She didn't realize she was being hunted herself. And somewhere in the shadows of his own organization, someone was waiting to destroy them both. The Kong estate sat at the edge of Pyeongkang-dong, like a monument to old power. Traditional Korean architecture merged with modern glass and steel, creating something that was neither entirely historic nor entirely contemporary. The ground stretched across acres of carefully tended gardens, pathways lined with ancient pine trees that had been transplanted from somewhere in the north. Amara's car stopped at the gate, and a security guard examined her invitation, with the particular attention that suggested he had been briefed. Miss Okafor, you're expected. The gates opened. She drove through. The evening had begun with the same careful preparation she had brought to the restaurant dinner. Hairstyled elegantly, dress selected for impact. This time a deep burgundy that paid subtle tribute to her Igbo heritage through patterns woven into the fabric. Confidence worn like armor, but underneath the armor, uncertainty churned. Sunhis revelations had changed everything. Minjae hadn't ordered her father's destruction. Someone else had, and that someone was still alive, still watching, still dangerous. And tonight, she would be walking into a room full of suspects. A valet took her car. A butler escorted her through the main entrance. And then she was standing in the Kong family home, surrounded by Seoul's most powerful elite, wearing clothes she had purchased with savings she could barely afford, carrying herself like someone who belonged. The gathering was smaller than she expected, perhaps 30 people, scattered through interconnected rooms that opened onto each other in the traditional Korean style. Conversations hummed beneath the soft sounds of a string quartet. Waiters circulated with champagne and elegant appetizers, and everyone was watching her. Not obviously, not directly, but she could feel the attention, like heat against her skin. Curious glances, whispered comments, the particular weight of assessment that powerful people aimed at newcomers. Miss Okafor, she turned. Minjae stood 3 feet away, impeccable in a black suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. The dragon tattoo was visible at his collar. She could see it clearly for the first time. Traditional Korean ink work that climbed from his chest toward his throat. His eyes were unreadable. Mr. Kong, I'm surprised my mother invited you. She usually prefers to vet her guest lists more carefully. Your mother invited me personally. Amara met his gaze directly. Last night, she came to my apartment. Something flickered in Minja's expression. Surprise, quickly controlled. My mother visited your apartment. She wanted to have a conversation about assumptions and truth. Amara accepted a champagne glass from a passing waiter, more to have something to do with her hands than from any desire to drink. She suggested that the things I believed about your family might be incomplete. And what do you believe about my family? The question hung between them around them. The party continued conversations, laughter, the soft clink of glasses. But in this small space, there was only the two of them, and the weight of everything neither was saying. "I believe," Amara said slowly, "that your brother made decisions you never authorized. I believe someone helped him. And I believe that someone is in this room tonight." Minj's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "You've learned more than my mother expected. I've spent 3 years researching your family, Mr. Kong. I've followed trails that most people don't even know exist. And I've discovered that the truth is never as simple as it first appears." "The truth about what?" "The truth about who really destroyed my father?" The words landed with precision. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The string quartet shifted to a new piece, something melancholy and beautiful. Across the room, Sun-hee caught eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. "Walk with me." Minji's voice was quiet. "There are things we need to discuss that shouldn't be overheard." He turned and walked toward a side door. After a moment, Amara followed. The garden behind the main house was designed for moments like this. Private conversations among people who needed privacy. Minjae led her to a small pavilion near the edge of the property. Traditional Korean architecture. Wooden floors polished by generations of use. Lanterns cast soft golden light across their faces. "I know why you came to work for me." He didn't look at her as he spoke. His eyes were fixed on something in the distance. The city lights, perhaps, or memories she couldn't see. "I know you believe I destroyed your father's company. I believed that." Past tense. He turned to face her. Then, in the lantern light, his feature seemed softer than she expected, less cold, less controlled. There was something in his eyes that looked almost like pain. "My brother Junior was ambitious, reckless. He made decisions that I never would have approved." A pause. "By the time I learned what he had done in Lagos, it was too late. Your father's company was already gone, and Junior was already making plans for his next expansion. Your mother told me he had help. Someone inside your organization?" "Yes." Minjae's jaw tightened. "I met with that person last night. He gave me information, documentation of what Junio did and who helped him do it." Director Yun Minja's surprise was visible this time. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching your organization for 3 years, Mr. Kong. Because I've noticed which people attend which meetings, which names appear on which documents, which faces look nervous when certain topics are raised." Amara stepped closer to him. "I've been watching because I wanted to understand exactly how my father was destroyed. And now I understand. You understand that it wasn't me. I understand that you didn't give the order, but you inherited the empire that benefits from what was done. You're still the head of the family that destroyed mine." The accusation hung in the air. Minjae didn't defend himself. "You're right," he said quietly. "I bear responsibility for what my family does. Even the things I didn't know about. Even the things I didn't authorize." He met her eyes. "If you want justice for your father, I won't stop you." It was not what she expected. She had prepared for denial, for anger, for the cold dismissal she had seen him level at so many others during her 18 months in his office. Instead, he was offering her something else. "What do you mean?" "Director Yoon gave me information last night. Evidence of what he and Junio did. Evidence that could be used to prosecute, that could bring some measure of accountability." Minjae reached into his jacket pocket. pulled out a flash drive. Everything's on here. She stared at the small device. You're giving me evidence against your own family. I'm giving you the truth. What you do with it is your choice. His hand extended toward her. The flash drive sat in his palm, glinting in the lantern light. Behind them, the sounds of the party drifted through the evening air. Laughter, music, the normal sounds of wealthy people enjoying themselves. Amara reached for the drive. Their fingers touched. The contact lasted only a moment, barely long enough to register. But something passed between them in that instant. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The feeling of two people who had spent their lives building walls, suddenly finding a crack in each other's defenses. She pulled her hand back. The flash drive was warm in her palm. There's something else you should know. Minj's voice had changed. Lower. More urgent. Yoon told me something last night that changes everything. You'd invite me to my organization by accident. Someone arranged for you to be here. Someone has been using you as a weapon against me. Using me? The documents you found, the trail that led to Kong Industries, the job opportunity that placed you in my office. His eyes bore into hers. None of it was coincidence. Someone wanted you here. Someone who wants to see both of us destroyed. The implications washed over her like cold water. She had believed she was in control. She had believed her careful planning, her patient infiltration, had been entirely her own work. But if Minj was telling the truth, who I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they're here tonight. His gaze swept toward the main house, where lights glowed in every window, watching, waiting to see if their plan is working. If this is a trick, it's not a trick. He stepped closer, and suddenly they were standing inches apart, close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his breath moved in his chest. I have no reason to lie to you. Not anymore. You know the truth about my brother. You have evidence that could damage my entire family. If I wanted to protect myself, the last thing I would do is give you more weapons. He was right. She knew he was right. And yet, why are you doing this? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Because justice matters more than protection. His voice was barely above a whisper. Because my brother did something terrible, and I've spent 6 years pretending it didn't happen. Because somewhere along the way, I started watching you. Really watching you. And I realized you deserved better than the games I was playing. The dinner, the invitation as a joke. Yes. Shame flickered across his features. That was cruel. I was trying to prove something to myself, maybe more than to anyone else, that I still controlled everything, that I could still play with people's lives without consequence. And now? Now I'm standing in my own garden giving evidence to a woman who came here to destroy me because I've realized that control is worthless if it requires becoming the kind of man my father was. The confession hung between them. For a long moment, Amara didn't know how to respond. This wasn't the man she had spent 3 years hating. This wasn't the cold, calculating monster she had imagined during sleepless nights, planning his downfall. This was someone complicated, someone carrying his own burdens, someone who had looked at her across a restaurant table and seen something that made him question his own choices. I don't know if I can forgive what your family did. The honesty surprised her, even as she spoke it. My father died because of what happened in Lagos. My mother never recovered. My entire life was shaped by that destruction. I know, but I'm starting to believe you didn't cause it. And I'm starting to believe there's something larger happening here. something that puts both of us in danger. Min-jae nodded slowly. Then we have a choice to make. What choice? We can remain enemies. You can take that evidence and destroy what's left of my family. I can let my mother handle this situation the way she handles everything. Quietly, ruthlessly, without concern for who gets hurt. His eyes met hers. Or we can work together, find out who's really behind this. Discover who killed my brother and who's been using you as a weapon. Get justice for both of us. Work together. Yes. The word hung between them, like a door waiting to be opened. Amara looked at the man standing in front of her. The man she had spent 3 years hating. The man who had invited her to dinner as a joke. The man whose eyes had followed her across that restaurant was something she still couldn't quite name. If I do this, she said slowly, if I agree to work with you, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for my father, for my family, for the truth. I understand. And I don't trust you. Not completely, not yet. You shouldn't. He smiled, and it transformed his face in ways she hadn't expected. Trust is earned. My mother told you that, didn't she? She did. Then let's start earning it. He extended his hand, not offering another piece of evidence this time, but something else. A partnership, a truce, the beginning of something neither of them could entirely name. Amara looked at his hand. Then, slowly, she took it. His grip was firm, warm. The dragon tattoo peeked out from beneath his sleeve. Ancient symbols she was only beginning to understand. One condition, she said. Name it. You stop calling me Miss Okafor. My name is Amara. For the first time since she had known him, Kong Minj laughed. Amara, he repeated. That's a beautiful name. What does it mean? Grace. She met his eyes. It means grace. They returned to the party separately. She threw the garden entrance. He threw a side door that connected to his private study. The arrangement was deliberate. Both of them understood that being seen together would raise questions neither was ready to answer. But something had changed. As Amara moved through the elegant crowd, accepting a fresh glass of champagne, exchanging small talk with strangers who looked at her with new interest, she felt different, lighter perhaps, or more focused. The anger that had sustained her for 3 years was still there, but it had shifted, redirected toward a new target. Someone in this room had helped destroy her father. Someone in this room had used her as a weapon, and now she was going to find out who. Her eyes swept the gathering, cataloguing faces, noting interactions. Director Yun stood near the fireplace, talking with an elderly woman whose jewelry suggested old money. His expression was calm, but she noticed the way his fingers tightened around his whiskey glass when Min-jae entered the room. Park Junho, Min-jae's right-hand man, was watching her from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but she caught something in his eyes that might have been approval or warning. It was hard to tell. And near the window, half hidden by the curtains, stood a woman Amara didn't recognize. Elegant, perhaps early 30s, watching the party with the particular attention of someone who was gathering information. Miss Okafor, she turned. The man approaching her was perhaps 45. Suave, well-dressed, with the kind of practiced charm that suggested years of networking at events like this. His smile was warm, but his eyes were calculating. You must be Minja's new secretary. I've heard remarkable things about you. Remarkable things? My name is Han Jin Woo. I'm a business associate of the Kong family. He offered his hand. And yes, I've heard remarkable things. Everyone's talking about the dinner last night. about how you completely transformed the evening's dynamics. Amara accepted his handshake, noting the way his grip lingered just slightly too long. I simply dressed appropriately for the occasion. You did more than that. Ginwoo's smile widened. You revealed that you are much more than what you appeared to be. That's dangerous in circles like these. Dangerous. Powerful people prefer predictability. When someone shows unexpected depth, it makes them nervous. He lowered his voice, and Min-jae looked very nervous watching you last night. There was something beneath his words. An invitation, perhaps, or a warning. Are you trying to tell me something, Mr. Han? I'm trying to offer friendly advice. His eyes flickered toward where Min-jae stood across the room, engaged in conversation with an elderly man. Min-jae is not a man who handles surprises well, and you've become quite a surprise. I'll keep that in mind. Please do. Ginwoo's smile faded slightly. Not everyone in this room wants to see him succeed. And by extension, not everyone wants to see the people around him succeed either. He nodded politely and drifted away toward another conversation. Amara watched him go, her mind racing. Not everyone in this room to see him succeed. Was that a warning, a threat, or something else entirely? He's testing you. The voice came from behind her, familiar now, unexpectedly warm. Min-jae had appeared beside her, without her noticing his approach. Han Jin-woo, he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. He was one of my brother's closest associates. They were planning to expand into shipping together before Junior died. You think he was involved? I think he knows more than he's saying. Min's eyes tracked Jin-woo across the room. He was in Lagos 3 months before my brother's operation against your father. I found records of the trip in Yun's files. Legos. The word hit Amara like a physical blow. He was in Lagos meeting with unnamed business contacts. The records don't specify who. Min-jae turned to face her, his expression carefully controlled. But if my brother had a partner in the African expansion, someone who provided local intelligence, helped identify targets, Ginwoo would be the logical choice. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I only discovered it an hour ago. The files on that flash drive are extensive. I'm still processing what they contain. He paused. But I wanted you to know before you spent more time with him. There was something protective in his voice. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. What do you want me to do? Nothing yet. Just observe. Watch how he interacts with others tonight. Watch who he talks to, who he avoids. Minji's eyes met hers. You're good at watching. I learned that finally. Let's use it. Before she could respond, a small commotion near the main entrance drew everyone's attention. Sun-hee was welcoming a new arrival, an elderly woman in traditional Korean clothing, her bearing regal despite her obvious age. The crowd parted before her like waves before a ship. Who is that? My grandmother. Minja's voice had gone carefully neutral. Kong Yan-soo, the real power behind this family. The elderly woman's eyes swept the room and stopped when they reached Amara. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Kong Yan-soo smiled. It was not a kind smile. Miss Okafor. The old woman's voice carried across the room with surprising strength. I've been wanting to meet you. Come walk with me. It wasn't a request. Amara looked at Min-jae. His expression revealed nothing. Go, he murmured. But be careful. My grandmother is not what she appears. Amara straightened her spine, adjusted her grip on her champagne glass, and walked toward the most dangerous woman in the room. The private garden where Kong Yan-soo led her was different from the pavilion where Min-jae had made his confession. This space was older, more traditional. A Korean garden in the classical style, with carefully placed stones, and a small pond that reflected the lantern light. The sounds of the party faded behind them as they walked deeper into the carefully designed landscape. "You're very beautiful," the old woman said finally. Different from what I expected. More substantial. "Thank you, Mrs. Kong. Call me grandmother." "Everyone does." Yanu settled onto a stone bench with the careful movements of someone managing a body that no longer responded as quickly as her mind demanded. "I've lived for 83 years. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched men destroy themselves over love, money, power." Her eyes fixed on Amara, and I've learned to recognize when something important is happening. "What's happening?" "My grandson is changing." Jance's voice carried no particular emotion, neither approval nor disapproval. "I watched him at that dinner last night. I watched how he looked at you. I haven't seen him look at anyone like that since." She trailed off, since he was a young man. Before his father taught him that love was weakness, before he learned to be the silent king, the old woman's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "My son, Minja's father, was a cruel man. Effective, but cruel. He believed that power required absolute control of business, of family, of emotion. Minjae seems to have learned that lesson well. Too well." Yanu sighed. He built walls around himself so high that even I couldn't reach him. "I watched my grandson become a machine, perfectly efficient, impossibly cold. I thought the boy I remembered was gone forever. And now he looks at you like you're something he can't control, something that frightens him and fascinates him in equal measure." The old woman's eyes were sharp despite her age. "Do you know what that means, child? I'm not sure I do. It means you have power over him. The kind of power that can destroy or transform. The kind of power that people in this room would kill to possess." Yansu leaned forward. "The question is, what will you do with it?" Amara felt the weight of the question pressing down on her. "I came here for justice," she said slowly. "For my father, for my family." "I know." There was no surprise in Yansu's voice. "My daughter-in-law kept me informed. You believed Minjae destroyed your father's company. You spent years planning revenge, and now I know it wasn't him. Do you?" The question was sharp. "Or do you simply want to believe it wasn't him? Because believing otherwise would make things complicated." The observation cut deeper than Amara expected. "The evidence. Evidence can be manufactured. Truth can be shaped to serve various purposes." Jance's voice had gone harder. "I've lived long enough to know that nothing is ever as simple as it seems. My grandson may not have given the order that destroyed your father, but he inherited the empire that benefits from that destruction. He walks in the shadow of what his family has done." He said the same thing. "Did he?" Something flickered in the old woman's eyes. "That's interesting. Minjae doesn't usually acknowledge weakness. Not to anyone. He gave me evidence. A flash drive. Everything his brother did." Yansu was silent for a long moment. The pond reflected the lanterns. Somewhere in the main house, music played. The night wrapped around them like a blanket. My younger grandson, Junior, was a monster. The words came quietly, carrying the weight of old grief. I loved him because he was my blood, but I knew what he was. Ambitious, cruel, willing to destroy anything that stood between him and what he wanted. Like my father, like your father, like many others. Yansu's eyes met Amara's, And someone killed him for it. Someone who saw him as a threat. Someone who decided that his ambition had grown too dangerous. Min-jae, I don't know. The admission seemed to cost the old woman something. I've spent 6 years wondering. 6 years watching my surviving grandson for signs of guilt. 6 years trying to understand what really happened on that road where Junio's car crashed. But I suspect many people, including my grandson, Yansu's voice was raw, including myself. I gave Junio access to resources he shouldn't have had. I let him pursue his ambitions because they were profitable. I'm as responsible for what happened to your father as anyone else in my family. The confession hung in the air. Amara hadn't expected this. She had prepared for denial, for defensiveness, for the cold calculation she had seen in Sunhai. Instead, she was facing something far more complicated. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth. Or at least as much of it as I understand. Yansu rose from the bench, her movements slow but deliberate. And because I see something in you, child, something that reminds me of myself a very long time ago. What strength? Not the loud, aggressive strength that men mistake for power. The quiet strength. The strength that endures. The strength that watches and waits and strikes when the moment is right. The old woman reached out, placed one paper-thin hand against Amara's cheek. Use it wisely. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide to do with what you've learned, use your strength wisely. She turned and walked back toward the main house, leaving Amara alone in the garden. The lantern light flickered. The pond reflected stars, and somewhere in the darkness, Amara heard footsteps approaching. Min-jae found her by the water's edge. She was standing still, her burgundy dress catching the light, her face turned towards something he couldn't see. The conversation with his grandmother had lasted longer than he expected. He had watched them through the windows, unable to hear what was being said, growing increasingly anxious as the minutes stretched. What did she tell you? Amara didn't turn around. The truth or her version of it? My grandmother has many versions of the truth. It depends on what she needs at any given moment. She said she suspects you of killing your brother. The words hit him like a blow. He had known on some level that his grandmother doubted him. He had seen it in her eyes at Junior's funeral. The question she never asked, the accusation she never voiced. But hearing it spoken aloud was different, harder. And you? His voice came out steadier than he felt. Do you suspect me? Amara finally turned to face him. In the lantern light, she was impossibly beautiful, not the carefully constructed elegance of the dinner, but something raw, more real. Her eyes searched his face, as though looking for something specific. I don't know what I suspect anymore. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Everything I thought I knew keeps changing. Every answer leads to more questions. I came here so certain, so absolutely certain that I knew who destroyed my family. And now she trailed off. Now you're not certain of anything. No. The honesty between them felt fragile, precious, like something that could shatter at the slightest wrong word. I didn't kill my brother. Min-jae stepped closer, close enough that he could see the slight tremor in her hands. I won't pretend I wasn't angry when I found out what he'd done. I won't pretend I didn't think about it, about what it would mean to have him removed. But I didn't do it. Then who did? I don't know. The admission felt like failure. And that's what haunts me. Someone murdered Junior. Someone in my world. Probably someone I know, And I've spent 6 years pretending to investigate, while actually hiding from the truth because I was afraid of what I might find. Afraid of what? Afraid it was someone close to me. Afraid it was justified. Afraid that understanding why Junio died would force me to confront everything my family is. Everything I pretended not to see. His voice cracked on the last word. He turned away, embarrassed by the emotion he couldn't control. Amara's hand touched his arm. The contact was light, barely there, but it stopped him completely. Minjae. It was the first time she had used his name. Not Mr. Kong. Not Sir. His name. He turned back. She was standing very close now. Close enough that he could see the gold threading in her dress. The small scar near her left eyebrow that he had never noticed before. The way her breath moved in her chest. "I don't trust you," she said softly. "I can't. Not yet. Not completely. There's too much history between your family and mine. Too much pain. Too many unanswered questions. I understand." But she paused. "I believe you didn't kill your brother. And I believe you didn't order the attack on my father." Something in his chest loosened. "Why?" "Because I've spent 18 months watching you, listening to your conversations, observing how you treat the people around you." Her eyes held his. "You're not the man I wanted you to be. You're not the monster I needed you to be. You're something more complicated, something I'm only beginning to understand." The space between them felt charged, electric with possibilities neither was ready to name. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we find out who really did these things." "Your brother, my father, all of it." Her jaw set with determination. "We follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads somewhere we don't want to go. Together. Together." The word hung between them like a promise. Behind them, the party continued. Lives moved forward. The world turned on its axis. But in this garden, in this moment, something had fundamentally changed. Two people who had spent years on opposite sides of an invisible war had finally begun to see each other clearly. And what they saw was neither enemy nor ally. It was something far more dangerous. It was the beginning of understanding. 3 months later, the investigation had taken them through Seoul's darkest corners. They had followed paper trails through offshore accounts. They had interviewed former associates of Juneo who were willing to talk, and many who weren't. They had pieced together the full scope of the African expansion, the damage it had caused, the lives it had destroyed. And now, finally, they were close. The evidence pointed to Han Jin-woo, the charming businessman who had approached Amara at the estate party. He had been Juneo's partner in everything: the Lagos operation, the shipping expansion, the systematic destruction of competitors across 3 continents, and he had been the one to arrange Genesios' death when his ambition threatened to expose them both. "Are you ready?" Minja's voice was quiet in the darkness of the car. They were parked outside Jean Woos' penthouse, waiting for the signal that would begin the confrontation they had spent months preparing. Amara nodded. "I'd been ready for years." "This won't bring your father back." "I know." She turned to face him. "But it will bring justice. It will bring the truth. And that has to be enough." 3 months of working together had changed things between them. The professional distance had collapsed first, then the personal barriers. Slowly, carefully, they had begun to trust each other. Sharing meals, sharing information, sharing the small vulnerabilities that accumulate when two people spend too much time in each other's orbit. There had been moments, glances that lasted too long, touches that meant more than they should. A near kiss one evening in his office, interrupted by a phone call that arrived at exactly the wrong moment. Neither had spoken about these moments, but both knew they existed, and both knew that whatever happened tonight would change things permanently. Amara Minj's voice had softened in a way that was becoming familiar. Whatever happens in there, whatever we discover, I want you to know something. What these months with you have been. He paused, searching for words. They've been the first time in years I've felt like myself. The first time I felt like I wasn't just performing a role. You've seen me, really seen me, in ways no one else has. She was quiet for a long moment. I know, she said finally, because you've seen me, too. Their eyes met in the darkness. The space between them felt charged with everything they hadn't said, everything they had been too careful to admit. And then the signal came. The confrontation was about to begin. Jean Woo's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building he owned through a maze of shell companies. Minjay entered, first using access codes he had obtained through methods Amara preferred not to know about. The security system disabled silently. The elevator rose without sound. They found him in his study, surrounded by the trappings of legitimate wealth. Art on the walls, books on the shelves, a view of Seoul that suggested everything was possible if you had enough money. Min Jin-woo didn't seem surprised to see them. And the charming Miss Okafor, I wondered when you would come. You know why we're here? Of course. Jin-woo sat down the whiskey he had been drinking. You've got it out, haven't you? All of it. Junior, Legos, the expansion that was never supposed to happen. And his death? His death. Jin-woo's smile faded. Yes, that was necessary. You killed him. I arranged for his death. There's a difference. Jin-woo moved toward the window. Junior was brilliant, but he was careless. He left trails, evidence. He was going to get us all caught, and I couldn't let that happen. So, you murdered him? I protected myself, protected the organization. Protected? He turned to face Minj. If Junio had been caught, if his activities had been investigated properly, everything would have come out. Everything your father built, everything you inherited, it would all have been destroyed. You're saying you killed my brother to protect me. I'm saying I killed your brother to protect all of us. Jin-woo's voice had gone hard. Including you. Including the empire you've spent the last 6 years pretending you didn't know was built on blood. The accusation hung in the air. Amara watched Minj's face, watched the emotions that flickered across his features. Anger, grief, something that looked almost like relief. You're under arrest. Minj's voice was flat. Yun has already been taken into custody. The evidence we've gathered, the evidence you so helpfully provided through your carelessness, is being reviewed by prosecutors as we speak. Jin-woo laughed. Arrest? You think you can arrest me? He shook his head. Minjay, I've spent 20 years building connections in this city. Judges, politicians, police. Do you really think a flash drive and some uncomfortable questions will be enough to take me down? Yes. Amara spoke for the first time, because the evidence isn't just going to prosecutors. Jin-woo's smile faltered. What do you mean? The documents are also going to every major news organization in Asia. Every financial regulator who's been looking for a reason to investigate offshore accounts. Every international authority that's been building cases against organized crime. Amara stepped forward. By morning, Your face will be on every screen in Seoul. Your accounts will be frozen. Your associates will be scrambling to distance themselves from you. You're bluffing. Am I? She held up her phone, showing him the screen. It's already started. Look at the headlines. Jing-Woo's face went pale. You can't do this. I'll destroy you, both of you. I have information. You have nothing. MJ's voice was ice. Whatever information you thought you possessed, I've already accounted for it. The people you expected to protect you have been given very clear instructions about where their loyalty should lie. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Min-jae nodded toward the door, where security personnel were entering. Han Jin-woo, you're being detained for questioning related to the murder of Kong Juno and the systematic destruction of international business operations, including Lagos Trading Corporation. Jin-woo was led away, his protests echoing through the penthouse. And then they were alone. The silence afterward felt enormous. Amara stood by the window, looking out at the city that had contained her pain, her secrets, her transformation for 3 long years. Seoul stretched beneath her like a living thing, breathing, pulsing, indifferent to the small, human dramas that played out in its towers and alleys and rain streets. It was over. The man who had destroyed her father's company, the man who had murdered Minji's brother, the man who had orchestrated years of suffering from behind a mask of charm and legitimate business. Gone. She should have felt relief, triumph, the satisfaction of justice finally delivered after years of patient, agonizing work. Instead, she felt hollow. Amara. Minji's voice came from behind her, quiet, stripped of the authority he wore like armor. She didn't turn around. If she turned around, she would have to face what came next. The investigation was over. The mission was complete. There was no longer any reason for her to remain at Kong Industries. No reason to maintain the pretense of secretary and employer. No reason to stay. It's done, she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Distant, like someone speaking from the far end of a long corridor. Yes, my father. Mahantat, she stopped, swallowed, tried again. My father can rest now. Wherever he is, he can rest. He would be proud of you. The words broke something inside her. She had held herself together for 3 years. Through the planning, the deception, the 18 months of being invisible, through the dinner that changed everything, through the months of investigation, the sleepless nights, the constant tension of living between 2 worlds. She had been strong because strength was all she had. But now, in the silence of a penthouse that smelled like expensive whiskey and old secrets, with a man who was supposed to be her enemy standing behind her, Amara Okafor finally broke. The tears came without warning, silent at first, then shaking her shoulders, her hands, her entire body. She pressed her palm against the cold glass of the window and let 3 years of grief pour out of her like water through a broken dam. She cried for her father, who had died believing he was a failure. She cried for her mother, whose Korean heart had never fully recovered from the destruction of the life she had built in Lagos. She cried for the girl she had been before all of this, the bright, hopeful girl who had believed the world was fundamentally fair. And she cried for the woman she had become, the weapon, the infiltrator, the invisible secretary who had sacrificed her own identity for the sake of revenge. She didn't hear Min-jae move. She didn't feel him approach. But suddenly his coat was around her shoulders, warm, heavy, carrying the scent of cedar and something darker that she had come to associate with him. He didn't touch her, didn't speak. He simply stood behind her close enough that she could feel his warmth, far enough that she could step away if she needed to. He let her cry. It was perhaps the most generous thing anyone had ever done for her. Minutes passed. The city lights blurred through her tears, turning Seoul into an impressionist canvas of gold and white and neon blue. Gradually, the sob subsided. The shaking stopped. She became aware of the coat on her shoulders, the warmth of it, the way it anchored her to the present moment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize for being human." His voice was closer than she expected. "You spent 3 years being a weapon. You're allowed to be a person." She turned then. He was standing less than a foot away, close enough that she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the tiredness in his eyes, the dragon tattoo climbing from his collar in the low light. His expression was unguarded in a way she had never seen before. No mask, no calculation, no silent king. Just a man who had watched the woman in front of him shatter and had chosen not to look away. "What happens now?" she asked. The question felt enormous, containing not just the immediate logistics of arrests and evidence and legal proceedings, but everything else, the unspoken things, the moments that had accumulated between them over 3 months, like snow gathering on a rooftop. Now he was quiet for a moment. Now you have a choice. A choice. You came here for justice. You've achieved it. Jin Woo will face consequences for what he did. Yun's testimony will corroborate everything. He paused. "You're free, Amara. Free to go home. Free to return to Lagos, to your family. Free to build whatever life you want. Free." The word should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like loss. And if I don't want to go, the question escaped before she could stop it. Raw, honest, stripped of every defense she had ever constructed. Min-jae's eyes darkened. "Then you should know what staying means." "What does it mean?" "It means my world doesn't become less dangerous just because Jin Woo is gone. There are others. There will always be others. Power creates enemies the way storms create waves." He reached toward her face slowly, giving her time to pull back. His thumb brushed the tear track on her cheek. "Staying means accepting that the man you choose to be with carries darkness. Staying means trusting me with the same courage you showed when you walked into that restaurant 3 months ago." His hand lingered on her cheek. She didn't pull away. "You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to be honest. For once in my life." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "You deserve honesty. After everything, after the dinner, the investigation, the lies, you deserve someone who tells you the truth, even when the truth is ugly. The truth is always ugly. My father taught me that." Amara placed her hand over his, the hand still resting on her cheek. His fingers were warm, steady, real. "But he also taught me that ugly truths are better than beautiful lies. Your father was wise. He was, and he would have hated you." Min-jae laughed. That rare, genuine sound that transformed him from the silent king into someone almost ordinary. "I have no doubt. But he also would have understood why I'm standing here, why I'm not running." She tightened her grip on his hand. He fell in love with a Korean woman, in a world that told him he shouldn't. He built a life between 2 cultures, 2 languages, 2 worlds. He understood that love doesn't always arrive in the form you expect. The word landed between them. Love. Neither had said it before. Neither had been brave enough. But now, in the aftermath of everything, the secrets, the betrayals, the slow dismantling of every wall they had built, the word felt not like a confession, but like a recognition. something that had been true for longer than either of them wanted to admit. Amara. Minj's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Need you to understand. I am not a good man. I have done things. I know what you've done. I've read every file, every document, every report that crossed your desk for 18 months. She met his eyes. I know who you are, Minj. The real you. Not the silent king. Not the businessman. Not the man your father wanted you to become. The man who gave me evidence against his own family because justice mattered more than protection. The man who stood behind me while I cried and didn't try to fix anything. I wanted to fix it. I know, but you didn't. You let me feel what I needed to feel. That's not something a monster does. His forehead came to rest against hers, a gesture so intimate, so impossibly tender from a man who had built his entire identity on emotional control that it took her breath away. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing, existing. Two people who had found each other in the wreckage of something terrible and discovered that the ruins contained seeds. Then he kissed her. It was gentle, far gentler than she would have expected from a man who commanded empires. His lips brushed hers like a question, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to say no, to choose the safety of distance. She chose closeness instead. Her hand found the back of his neck. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. Soul glittered behind them. 10 million lights bearing witness to a moment that belonged only to them. The kiss deepened. Still gentle, still tender, but carrying the weight of everything they had survived. 3 years of pain, months of deception, weeks of slowly falling into something neither could control. When they finally pulled apart, Amara was trembling. Not from grief this time, from something else entirely. Something that felt like the first warm day after a long, brutal winter. Stay, Minj whispered. It wasn't a command. It was a request, perhaps the first genuine request he had made in years. I'll stay, she said. But not as your secretary. His lips curved. I was rather hoping for a promotion. To what? To the only person in the city I trust completely. She laughed, a real laugh, warm and unexpected. The laugh she hadn't been capable of 3 months ago, the kind of laugh that belonged to a woman who had finally set down the weight she had been carrying. I'll consider it, she said. But I have conditions. Name them. First, you stop calling me Miss Okafor in professional settings. It sounds ridiculous when the entire office knows you spent 3 months investigating a murder with me. Agreed. Second, you meet my mother properly. In Lagos, she's going to interrogate you in Yoruba and Korean simultaneously, and you're going to smile and answer every question. Something that might have been fear flickered across Minja's face. Your mother? She's terrifying. You'll love her. I sincerely doubt that. Third, Amara's voice softened. You let me help you rebuild. Not just the business, the family, your relationship with your mother, your grandmother, the parts of your life that you've been neglecting, because it was easier to be the silent king than to be Minj. His expression changed. Something raw and vulnerable surfacing beneath the composure. That might be the hardest condition of all. I know. That's why I'm asking for it. He was quiet for a long moment. The city breathed beneath him. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Jinwoo being transported, perhaps, or simply the ordinary sounds of a city that never fully slept. The penthouse was growing cold, the heating system apparently connected to security protocols that had been disrupted. But neither of them moved. "There's something I never told you," Min-jae said, finally, about the dinner. "The night I invited you as a joke. What about it?" "I told everyone it was a joke. I told Junho, Sunhun, all of them. I said I wanted to see how my awkward secretary would handle an evening with Seoul's elite." He paused. "But that wasn't the real reason." "Then what was?" "I wanted to see you outside the office. I wanted to see who you were when you weren't performing the role of my secretary." His eyes met hers. "I'd been watching you for months, noticing things. The way you moved, the way you handled difficult situations, with this quiet certainty that I couldn't understand. I found myself looking for you in rooms, listening for your voice, checking your desk when you were away. You were obsessed. I was curious. Obsession came later. A slight smile, much later when you walked through that restaurant door, and I realized that the woman I thought I understood was someone entirely different, someone stronger, someone more complex, someone who looked at me like she could see through every wall I'd ever built. I could. I know. That's what terrified me." She reached up, traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. He closed his eyes at the contact. A small surrender from a man who had spent his entire life refusing to surrender anything. "We should go," she said softly. "There will be questions, statements, legal proceedings." "Yes, and after that, he opened his eyes. "After that, I take you to meet my grandmother properly, without the manipulation, without the power games. Just dinner. Your grandmother tried to manipulate me the last time we had dinner. She manipulates everyone. It's how she shows affection." Amara shook her head, laughing despite herself. "Your family is impossible." "Yes." He took her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "But they're about to become your family, too. If you'll have us," the words were light, almost casual, but his eyes were not casual at all. She squeezed his hand. "I'll have you," she said. "All of you. The empire, the secrets, the terrifying grandmother. All of it." "You're sure, Min-jae?" She stepped closer, close enough that their breasts mingled. "I spent 3 years planning to destroy you. I spent 18 months pretending to be invisible in your office. I spent 3 months falling in love with you while investigating your brother's murder." Her voice dropped. "I think I'm sure." He brought her hand to his lips, a gesture that belonged to another century, another world. His mouth pressed against her neck with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "Then, let's go home." 6 months later, the wedding was held in Lagos. Not a grand affair. Amara's mother had insisted on that. Family first, Ada Okafor had declared in her particular blend of Yoruba and Korean that made both languages sound like music. The world doesn't need to see. The family needs to see. So the ceremony was small, intimate, held in the garden of the Okafor family compound, where Amara had spent her childhood chasing lizards and listening to her father's stories about business and integrity, and the importance of keeping your word. Min-jae wore traditional Korean hanbok, his concession to his own heritage. But Amara's mother had insisted on adding a Nigerian igbata over his shoulders, claiming he looked too serious without color. The result was oddly beautiful. A Korean underworld figure, draped in Nigerian fabric, standing beneath an African sun, looking at his bride like she was the answer to a question he had spent his entire life asking. Amara wore white, but not entirely white. The ocelot fabric had been woven by artisans her mother knew. Traditional Yoruba weavers who incorporated Korean silk into their designs, creating something that belonged to both worlds simultaneously. Gold threading, blue accents, A pattern that told a story of two cultures merging, two families healing, two people who had found each other in the ruins of something terrible and built something new. Park Jun-ho stood as Minja's best man, his expression a carefully maintained mask of dignity that cracked approximately every 30 seconds when he glanced at Minja Zigbata. Amara's cousin, Chadenma, who had spent months warning Amara about powerful men, and was now grudgingly admitting that this particular powerful man might possibly be acceptable, stood as maid of honor. She had arrived from Abuja 3 days earlier, taken one look at Minjae, and whispered to Amara, "He looks at you like you're oxygen, and he's been holding his breath." "Is that good?" Amara had asked. "It's terrifying. But yes, it's good." Kong Yansu, 83 years old, and refusing to acknowledge that international travel might be inadvisable at her age, sat in the front row, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had insisted on bringing Korean rice cakes for the reception, which sat alongside Amara's mother's jollof rice in a cultural collision that somehow against all odds worked beautifully. Sunhee sat beside her mother-in-law, her expression carrying the faint satisfaction of a woman whose plans had ultimately worked out, though not perhaps in the way she had originally intended. She had come to Amara's apartment that night to redirect a weapon. Instead, she had helped create something far more powerful than revenge. A family. "Do you?" The officiant began speaking in both Korean and English. "At the family's request, Kong Minj, take Amara Okapoor to be your wife. To honor, to protect, to stand beside in all things." Minjae looked at Amara. The garden was full of sunlight. Legos hummed beyond the compound walls, motorcycles and market sounds, and the distant rhythm of music from a neighbor's radio. African earth beneath their feet. Korean silk in her dress. Two worlds meeting in the space between two people. "I do," he said. And then in Korean, "I love you." And then in Yoruba, that he had spent 3 months secretly learning from Chadenma, who had charged him an exorbitant tutoring fee and donated everyone to a Lagos children's charity, Emiri. Amara's mother burst into tears. Jinho's composure broke entirely. Even Kong Yansu smiled. Amara laughed, that warm, unexpected laugh that had first captivated him in a restaurant in Seoul, and took his hands. "Do you?" the officiant continued. "Amara Okapoor, take Kong Minj to be your husband." She looked at him, really looked at him. The sharp jawline, the dark eyes that had watched her for months before she understood why. The dragon tattoo visible at his wrist, ancient Korean symbols that she could now read as fluently as she read the man who wore them. The man who had invited her to dinner as a joke and discovered that the punchline was his own heart. "I do," she said, "in every language I know." He kissed her. The garden erupted in applause, Korean and Nigerian voices blending into something new, something beautiful, something that sounded like the beginning of a story rather than the end of one. That evening, after the reception, after the dancing, after Minj had been pulled into a conversation with 3 of Amara's uncles who wanted to know his intentions, despite the fact that he had literally just married their niece, Amara found a quiet moment alone. She stood on the balcony of her childhood home, looking out at the Lego skyline. The city was noisy, vibrant, alive in ways that Seoul sometimes wasn't. She could smell jollof rice from the kitchen, hear her mother's laughter from downstairs, feel the warm African air against her skin. In her hand, she held the old photograph. Her parents on their wedding day. Her father, tall, proud, full of dreams that would eventually be stolen from him. Her mother, elegant, hopeful, standing between 2 worlds with the courage of a woman who believed love was worth any sacrifice. Papa, she whispered. I found the truth. I found justice. She looked down at the ring on her finger. Simple, elegant, a Korean design with a small Nigerian amber stone at its center. I found someone who sees me, really sees me the way you saw, Mama. Footsteps behind her. Min-jae appeared on the balcony, his handbag slightly rumpled from an evening of being embraced by Amara's enthusiastic relatives. The igbata had been removed at some point. She suspected her mother had reclaimed it, but he still wore a small piece of Nigerian fabric tied at his wrist, a gift from one of Amara's aunties. Your uncle asked me if I know how to farm yams, he said. Do you? I told him I would learn. She laughed. He came to stand beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. Below them, Lego sprawled and breathed and lived. Is this what you imagined? He asked. When you planned all of this 3 years ago, is this how you thought it would end? No. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I imagined destruction, revenge, justice that tasted like victory. She paused. This is better. Better, better. She turned her face up to look at him. This is grace. He kissed her forehead. They stood together on the balcony, the Mafia boss and the woman he had once tried to make a punchline and watch the sunset over Lagos. 2 worlds, 2 cultures, 2 people who had earned their happiness through sacrifice, through truth, through the slow, painful process of learning to see each other clearly. The silent king and the invisible woman, neither invisible nor silent anymore. Just 2 people standing together in the space where all the walls used to be. And that's where we'll leave them. Not at the end, but at the beginning. Because the best love stories don't end. They just find new chapters. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments what moment hit you the hardest.